Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Gopi Jana Balava Giribaradhare. Gopi Jana Balava Giribaradhare. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yamunatiravanachare. Yamunatiravanachare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Gopi Jana Balava Giribaradhare. Gopi Jana Balava Giribaradhare. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Yamunatiravanachare. Yamunatiravanachare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare. Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajacharya Status Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Shishi Radha Radhanath Ki Sri Giri Govardhan Ki Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Sri Gopanima Mahotsava Ki Gopremanande. All glories to the Desamal devotees. All glories to the Desamal devotees. All glories to the Desamal devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 3, talks between Lord Shiva and Sati. Text 19. Text 19, yes. Tataribhir na vyatate shilimukai shete arditango hridayena duyata svanam yata vakra diyam duruktibhir diva nisham tapyate marma tadita tatarabirna vyatate shalimukai sheter ditango hridayena duyata svanam yata vakra diyam duruktabir divanisham tapyati marmatadita tatarabirna vyatate shalimukai sheter ditango hridayena duyata svanam yata vakra diyam duruktabir divanisham tapyati marmatadita tatarabirna vyatate shalimukai sheter ditango hridayena duyata Svanam yata vakra diyam duruktibir. Divanisham tapyati marmatadita. Pangordayena duyata. Svanam yata vakra diyam duruktibir. Divanisham tapyati marmatadita. Tatarabhirna vyatate shilimukai. Sheterditang hridayena duyata. Svanam yata vakra diyam duruktibir. Divanisham tapyati marmatadita. Rabhirna vyatate shalimukai. Sheterditang hridayena duyata. Svanam yata vakra diyam duruktibir. Divanisham tapyati marmatadita. Tatarabhirna vyatate shalimukai. Sheterditang hridayena duyata. Svanam yata vakra diyam duruktibir. Divanisham tapyati marmatadita. Tata so aribhi enemy na not vyatate is hurt shalimukai by the arrows. Shete rests ardita aggrieved. Anga apart. Hridayena by the heart. Duyata grieving. Svanam of relatives. Yata as. Vakradiyam deceitful. Duruktibhi by harsh words. Divanisham day and night. Tapyati suffers. Marmatadita one whose feelings are hurt. Translation. Lord Shiva continued, if one is hurt by the arrows of an enemy, one is not as aggrieved as when cut by the unkind words of a relative, for such grief continues to rend one's heart day and night. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Sati might have concluded that she would take the risk of going to her father's house, and even if her father spoke unkindly against her, she would be tolerant, as a son sometimes tolerates the reproaches of his parents. But Lord Shiva reminded her that she would not be able to tolerate such unkind words, because natural psychology dictates that although one can suffer harm from an enemy and not mind so much, because pain inflicted by an enemy is natural, but when one is hurt by the strong words of a relative, one suffers the effects continually, day and night, and sometimes the injury becomes so intolerable that one commits suicide. Tatharabir na vyatate shili mukai, sheter ditango ridayena duyata, svanam yata vakra diyam duruktabir, divanisham tapyati marma tadita. Lord Shiva continued, if one is hurt by the arrows of an enemy, one is not as aggrieved as when cut by the unkind words of a relative, for such grief continues to rend one's heart day and night. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyadeshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha, Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So Lord Chaitanya is continuing his very profound and very clear advice to Sati. Who did I say? Lord Chaitanya. Jai, Lord Chaitanya. Sri Gopanima ki jai. Yeah, Lord Shiva. So Lord Shiva is continuing his advice. And of course, it's excellent advice. It's the right advice. It's just correct. Because he is such an extremely, just incredibly intelligent person generally. So people like that, they can understand due to different circumstances now what will happen in the future or the near future. Something like that, because people are sort of predictable. Once you get to know people well enough, then you can, of course, sometimes something extraordinary may happen, but in so many cases, when you get to know people well enough, then you'll know that if the situation is like this, that person is going to react in this way. And so often you'll be right. And so Lord Shiva is right, because he understands Daksha. He knows Daksha is not going to be nice. He's still in the same offensive, deeply offensive mood. And Sati is going to be the target for that. Lord Shiva knows. I mean, you could say he knows. Definitely he assumes. And he assumes correctly because he's so knowledgeable in such subjects, which otherwise other people like Sati, as Srila Prabhupada mentions here, she may have concluded that there'll be a risk. My father, he may get worked up about it and say something bad again, but it's okay, I'll tolerate. And, the benefit, as she sees it, of getting the association of her mother, who is actually affectionate, and her sisters, she has a whole lot of sisters, they'll all be there, and various other relatives and friends. The benefit of getting their association, and even one could say more or less enjoying their association and the different aspects of it, like we mentioned yesterday, and she has already mentioned dressing up nicely and ornamenting herself nicely with appropriate jewelry which fits in with her clothing. You know about these things, right? Of course you do. That all the pleasure she's going to get from these things and from being appreciated by her relatives and friends. The benefit, you could say, or the enjoyment she's going to get from that will be worth tolerating the discomfort of having to put up with her father, who she assumes is going to say some not nice things. Just like where there used to be, in New Vrindavan, we've mentioned before, back in the old days, I remember when I visited there in 1978, there was a weekly or monthly, maybe monthly, little newsletter that came out, Confessions of a Prasadam Addict. And he would evaluate all the feasts that had taken place. And he made the point, I read one, and I remember that he made the point that on Sunday, devotees, he would not eat breakfast because the feast was coming up in the sort of early afternoon or whatever. So he wouldn't eat breakfast, which of course, is generally it's a bit of an austerity or something. But he explained that there's a problem with eating breakfast on a Sunday, is that the rather sort of normal breakfast prasadam on Sunday, which is nothing special, particularly in New Vrindavan, it was nothing special at all. Porridge with water. Yeah. But it was worth that. Well, if you had the breakfast, which was sort of like, pretty transcendentally blasé, then you just wouldn't be able to get into the feast, into the special things. So like this, you tolerate one thing to maximize another thing. Yeah. And even Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, if you read his essay about Vatsasura, who came in the form of a calf, not a cow or a bull, but a baby, a calf. So in that essay he makes the point, he talks about, the whole thing basically is about children in Krishna consciousness, children and youths in Krishna consciousness, or actually, well, in relation to Krishna consciousness, but also just under the sort of circumstances that were prevalent at that time for the ordinary children. And he made the point, and it's an interesting point, that when people are children, when people are very young, then, for example, or particularly even, he said, they're not allowed to take intoxicants, like drink liquor. It's illegal. And if, in my youth, if anyone under 21 went into a public drinking house, the police would come around and check, like Friday nights, Saturday nights. And if they found someone who was underage, the person would be arrested. Yeah. And it was generally accepted that people don't drink liquor until they are, I believe the age may have come down now to 18. But anyway, whatever it is, there's some age limit. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, the way he expresses it there, is that he says that their idea, or at least a part of their idea, is that by refraining like that through one's youth, Shishi Radharanath Sri Giri Govardhan Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai, that by refraining like that, when you are allowed to then indulge when you're at the acceptable age, then your enjoyment will be greater. In other words, if you have sort of wiped yourself out in your childhood, and what to speak of youth, then, the whole experience will become stale, and it just won't be so much fun when you're an adult. Yes. So some austerity may increase the pleasure later on. This sort of idea. So Sati had some sort of version of that idea in her mind, but it was a miscalculation. But Lord Shiva knew much better that if you go there and your father acts as Lord Shiva basically knows he's going to act, because Lord Shiva understands the conditioned natures of people, then it's going to be too much for you. It will be intolerable, and it's going to have devastating effects. And as Prabhupada says here, Sometimes the injury becomes so intolerable that the person commits suicide when they're insulted by someone who would normally be expected to love you and to really have affection for you. So yes, Lord Shiva's insight is such that he basically, you could say he knows what's going to happen, and he's right. Whereas Sati, well, she has some sort of idea, of course, some sort of idea, but she doesn't understand clearly how devastating the criticisms of her father are going to be. Yeah, so it's an interesting point. It's a very interesting point. We see the same point, or a very similar, a related point, in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, when Nanda Maharaj is leaving Mathura, having paid his taxes, and on the way out, on the way back to, I suppose, Gokula, back to where he was living, he meets Vasudev. He meets Vasudev, yeah. And Vasudev tells him that, you know, when you go back, you're on your way back to, I think, Gokula. You're on your way back home. So watch out. Just watch out. So when you get home, there may be you may get a shock when you get home. And off they went to their respective destinations, and Nanda Maharaj, who's not as sort of socially in tune as Vasudev, who was a minister in the government, and, you know, he was like a hardened politician, you could say, in a sense, or highly experienced, and he knew how people react, and when their, so to speak, buttons get pushed. And he knew that Kamsa's buttons had been severely pushed, and Kamsa was about to react in some really inflamed way, do something dramatic. Yeah, but Nanda Maharaj was not really aware of these things, and he was just not so much in tune with what was going on. And therefore, as he's going on his way back, he was thinking, why did Vasudev say that? Because when Nanda Maharaj left Vrindavan or Gokula, things were normal. It was just happy Brijbasi life. But in the meantime, Putana had gone there on the instruction of Kamsa. And Vasudev may not have necessarily known that specifically, but he definitely knew that Kamsa was really angry and really upset and really concerned about his great enemy taking birth right at that time. So Nanda Maharaj was wondering, and then he got back, and there was the dead body of Putana, massive, gigantic, some kilometers long, like just an incredibly massive giantess dead. And Vasudeva saw that, and he thought, gosh, Nanda Maharaj saw that, and Nanda Maharaj thought, my Lord, how did Vasudeva know that? And actually, Nanda Maharaj thought, maybe he has mystical powers, and he can sort of see the future. But it wasn't that. It wasn't that. It was just that Vasudeva understood people and how they will act and react under different circumstances. And he knew that Kamsa was in a terribly volatile and angry and vengeful state of mind, and therefore he's going to do something heavy. He had sent Putana. So yes, but it wasn't mystical power. It was just insight due to his experience and intelligence and like that. In fact, in different societies, things which are often considered miracles or special interventions of God or something of that nature, it's just something which happens, but the people don't know how it happens. And so they think, wow, must be divine intervention. Like in Australia, they're some part of the Aboriginal culture was worship of the sun. And in the evening, they would do some special sort of puja, something like that, just to make sure the sun is born again tomorrow, because maybe it won't be. And so they do that, some sort of religious observance, and sure enough, the next day the sun would be born again or rise again, and this, therefore they would say, just see, our puja worked. But it's actually just the way things work in this world. So here we see Sati might have concluded in a certain way that, my father, he's a bit wild these days. He'll say something, but I'll tolerate it. And it won't bother me so much because it's going to be so nice. I'll be so happy and seeing everyone and all of that. So it's okay, I'll go. But Lord Shiva knows that it's not going to work like that because he has deeper insight. And we see in Krishna consciousness, in Srila Prabhupada, and in Krishna consciousness in general, so many understandings are there about life and people and how they think and what the consequences will be of how they think and how they act. And so much insight to what people are going to do to themselves, what people are going to do to society, what people are going to do to this planet. So much insight is there, which the sort of average person in the street never thought about. It's just not equipped with the understandings, the insight to know how things work in this material world. So Srila Prabhupada in the purport focuses on the point of the sort of the relative effect effects of being attacked by a known enemy, and being attacked by someone who, like a relative or a friend, someone who would normally be expected to be close and be affectionate, and who would not be expected to ever do anything like that at all. So, of course, the enemy, what can you expect? What can you expect? You can only expect that they're going to try their best to attack you and just do you harm. So if they do that, or if they try to do that, then it's not going to be like, wow, I can't believe it. You know, a shock. How could the person do it? In fact, interesting little point, small point, but it's interesting. I found it interesting. In the Sanskrit, in the beginning of the second line is the word shete, which means rests or sleeps, that sort of thing. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Srila Jiva Goswami, they both make the point that as the verse says, if one is hurt by the arrows of an enemy, if one is attacked by the enemy, still the effect on your mind, like the emotional effect in terms of, you know, why did the person attack me? If you're attacked by an enemy, that night you will be able to sleep. Whereas if you're attacked by a relative or a friend, such grief continues to rend one's heart day and night, and you won't be able to sleep. Because I imagine we've all, at least at some point in our lives, experienced some extreme disturbance and found it difficult to sleep that night. Did it ever happen to you? Never. Yes. Happened. Yeah, I assume it's happened, because that's life in this world. But so the point that they bring out is that even if you're attacked by an enemy, and even if they wound you physically, but still that night you may be able to sleep, because your mind will not be thinking, why did they do that? How could they do that? That sort of thing. But if you're attacked by a relative or a friend, then you may, just for days and weeks and months, you may be just in a state of great disturbance. How could my mother or my father or my brother or my friend do this? How could they do it? It's just, it's so disturbing. And I remember visiting George Harrison at the end of 1979. And I think it was at that time. And his wife his previous wife, that's right, had run off with his best friend, Eric Clapton. And, it sort of hurt him. He was my best friend. How could he do that? But after a while, she ran off with someone else too, and left Eric Clapton. and George Harrison, in one interview, someone asks him, well, what do you think of Eric Clapton? And George Harrison says, yeah, well, we're very good friends, actually. We share the same wife. Anyway, that's by the way. So, but yes, the term used in the Sanskrit is swanam, swanam. Swanam. Swa means your own, like swarup. Jivera swarup hoya, Krishnera nityadas. Swarup means, rupa means form or nature, and swa means your very, very own. Yeah, your very, very own. So, swarup, and there are different swa, different things which are your own. They're just essential parts of your very existence. They're not foreign. So, a relative is swa, is your own, your very own. There's no sort of externality in the relationship. They're just part of your very own existence. And when someone who's that intimately connected with you, that they're just part of your being more or less, and they turn on you, it's very painful. And even can lead to a person committing suicide. And of course we know this is what's going to happen with Sati. She's going to get so upset that even though her mother's there and all the others are there, but it'll be too intolerable and she'll commit suicide. Yes. So these are the things which are discussed here. What's the verse? I want to just check something. Okay, it's all right. Okay, Hare Krishna. Any comment or question? There's one hand up at the back there. Henalata.
You mentioned about this ceremony that Maoris do in the end of the day for the sun to come up. Would they still get some sort of benefit from this roundabout Surya worship?
Okay, you're referring to that, the practice.
Yeah.
And then what was the last part? I didn't quite get.
Would they still get some sort of benefit from this sort of roundabout
Some
Surya
benefit.
worship? Because in many other cultures also there's a pantheon of demigods.
Yeah.
Often they correlate
Sure.
to the Vedic.
I'm sure they would get some benefit. They would get some benefit because, Srila Prabhupada makes the point. One devotee asked Srila Prabhupada, it's recorded, you can locate it if you got Prabhupada's books and things on computer. Devotee asks Prabhupada, who is in a better position, just sort of by their background and upbringing, Christians or Hindus? And Prabhupada answers, Hindus. Because even if they just worship, everybody and anybody who shouldn't be worshipped in the ways that they're worshiping them, like as the supreme. but still they are, they're closer to Krishna as such. So, yeah, some people who do that sort of pantheistic, or, you can say pantheistic, or it's attributing like personal involvement to, that's sort of the definition of pantheism, attributing personal involvement to something which is just a natural function of this world. But of course, the so-called natural functions of this world, there are people behind them. Yeah, there are people behind them. So it would seem that they are a little closer to Krishna consciousness, and by respecting the natural order, it may be better to some degree, possibly. Is that okay?
Thank you so much.
Any other comment or question? Oh, Jai Sachinandan Prabhu.
Thank you, Maharaj, for that very philosophical class. You mentioned like Sati was going with some expectation to her fathers for the function. And I was thinking also like maybe parallels to what Arjuna was experiencing in his dilemma.
Arjuna?
Yes, and he used the word nimitani viparitani. He was seeing reversals, and what Krishna was wanting, that win the war and enjoy a prosperous kingdom, but he was seeing reversals. How can I enjoy when I, at the expense of my killing my family?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think Swarup Damodar Prabhu may want to make a comment. Anyway, or not.
Maharaj, Sati is receiving such intelligent advice from the most intelligent person, and she doesn't have the capacity to, she sort of acknowledges in some way, but still she's so moved to want to follow her desires. And we may find that in our own lives as devotees, and so how can we avoid that type of a situation, that we can be surrounded by all good advice and association, but we are still so overwhelmed?
Yes, sure, that's a very good point. And it happens. Of course it happens. I would say, like on a very foundational level, it's a point related to faith. The stronger our faith is in Krishna consciousness and Prabhupada and just Krishna consciousness, the more easily and the more clear it will be that we can't just indulge in some sort of borderline sort of what we may feel is borderline but may actually be detrimental. But if there isn't so much faith, then one won't be able to take the good advice so seriously, and one will just gravitate towards those questionable things, or perhaps worse than questionable, or at least things which are not the best for our Krishna consciousness. So I would say that on a basic level, it's a question of faith. And, of course, because devotees have their degrees of faith, but generally they have enough degrees of faith that they follow the regulative principles. And, it's clear I follow the regulative principles, not like, I try to follow them or something like that. Because for many people who are more, you can say devotees, but they're more sort of marginal in position. They don't always follow all the regulative principles, although they're connected with Krishna consciousness. Yeah. I was just thinking last couple of days about one devotee who became a Ritvik. And I asked his daughter on Sunday, so, I haven't seen the father for years, what's he doing? And she said, oh, well, he's sort of carrying on. And you know what she said? He's going to the river ranch, or whatever it's called these days. And I thought, I see. So, to become Ritvik means a person's faith in a very important aspect of Krishna consciousness. When the person's faith has been undermined, and therefore they're consciously engaged in something which is detrimental, although they're doing many other things which are, normal Krishna conscious things. Yeah, is that okay? Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.